All right. Thank you all for joining me on a lovely little Sunday night. Tonight's episode marks 90 episodes together in about 2 years, almost 2 years. And, sometimes we come together and it's focused lecture style. Sometimes we come together, it's pure research. Sometimes we come together, it's a response to a topical event that's happening this week. And sometimes it's just for fun. And tonight is just going to be a fun one. I have a topic that was prompted by a completely random news article by the New York Post this week about the man who I owe a personal thank you to, the one who most directly got me into this business, the life path that I'm on today, that got my noggin jogging and got me thinking, there are some things you just poke into it and a whole universe opens up. I talk about this sometimes as the wardrobe phenomenon, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The door is there all along, but you never see the cinematic universe, the magical joys of a whole alternate universe if you just never open that one little door. And that little door has a name tonight. The name of that door is Garry Kasparov. How many in the chat? Let me see how many people we have in here. This is going to be fun. We're going to do the full 4 hours tonight. And when we start getting into it, you'll understand that we're going to run out of time at the 4-hour mark. Because we could do this for 40 hours and still only be 20% of the way through the story. But let me check in on this real quick. Get cozy. So how many people in the chat know who this man is? Give me a vibe check. Maybe I'll turn on a little bit of a little bit more music in the background while we get situated. All right, I'm reading the chat. Let's see. Hunix knows. Kimmy does. Swenagal does. Sweengal. Honeybone. DSJ, no. Bananas, no. Gatherings, no. Slicks and Familiar. Seek the Others, yep. Daniel Cody, yep. Kelsey, no. Right to Fight, yep. Jal. Wow, this is like 50-50. That's great. This song is so good. We gotta listen to one more. While we listen to this, post in the chat why you think we're talking about Garry Kasparov tonight.
Old road that you
All right. All right. So let's start. Let's start with a quick recap this week. Tomorrow, I was supposed to be starting in a secret role with the U.S. federal government. I moved to Washington, D.C. You see the land before you here because I was supposed to start tomorrow on the thing that I very dramatically left Miami to do. There's a pause on that. Other things being worked out in the background. But while that is cooking, I'm just working through backlog stuff and had a fun chance just, what was it, yesterday? Man, it's been a long day. Just yesterday, I had this debate with Cenk, hosted by Zero Hedge, moderated by Queen Josie, the redheaded libertarian. Unfortunately, first of all, I mean, come on. That was kind of a no contest, right? That wasn't really. I don't think I even had to warm up. It was pretty funny. I almost felt bad after I heard the opening remarks. I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be more of a diplomacy mission. I don't know if you guys heard. They made their opening statements first, and then I could just tell by the kind of lack of any sort of nuanced understanding of even what the hell USAID was. I start off my opening remarks by saying, you know what, actually, I'm kind of here to listen. I'm sort of diplomatic bridge building, but I'll give you my takes. Because I do believe in a big tent. I've said a lot of harsh things about libertarians, and I know that Keith was from the Libertarian Institute. And I know Cenk has had a very interesting evolution, but is sort of in a bridge building process with elements of Trump world. And I didn't want to go internet blood sports, scorched earth, when I figured I could kind of communicate the main points relatively diplomatically. And I think that was done. The shame is, I think Timcast hosted it. No shade on Timcast, by the way. Tim and I have a great relationship. I've been on a show, I think, 4 times. But you can't listen to the damn thing because, this is a wireless demonstration, Wirecast demonstration. There's not only a visual watermark, there's an audio watermark every 30 seconds. So it's like every time I'm cooking. So I'm going to see if there's a way that I can use AI software to create a signature of that sound and then kind of frequency it out and then post the whole thing. But I thought it was a really interesting moment. And shout out to Zero Hedge for hosting it. I thought it was a really interesting moment because when they first told me, hey, we want to do this debate series, you against Cenk on cutting USAID, and you'll take the position on cutting USAID and Cenk will take the position of keeping it. I thought, oh, okay, well, you guys must have messed up. Must be something wrong here. Must be a typo or something. Cenk can't really be pro-USAID. That can't be possible. Cenk is, from 15 years ago to present, his whole bread and butter has been a bit about sort of hard left progressive politics that border on, if not outright endorse, economic socialism. Sort of left, what people call far left economic socialist theories. So much so that Cenk exists in the sort of populist left space that he does because limousine liberals hate Cenk's economic policies. It's bad for Wall Street. It's bad for London. we spent 50 years of the Cold War and still have spent the past 30 years post-Cold War systematically toppling, or at least attempting to topple, every single government that has held the positions at the national leadership level that Cenk holds. So I thought, okay, well, Cenk can't really believe that. He hates CIA coups of socialist leftist governments. I haven't heard much of his discography, but what I have heard is righteous railing against it, howling at the moon day and night. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll find out during the debate what's motivating this very strange inconsistency about his hatred of the CIA but love of USAID. And about a couple minutes into the debate, I guess right after my opening statement, I sort of saw, like, the lights go on in his eyes. And I think he actually said this phrase directly. I came here for a debate on foreign aid, but I ended up in a debate on the CIA. What's happening here? And I thought, oh, sweet summer child. Sweet summer child. He thinks it's a charity. This is going to be a delicate thing to... It's like telling someone that Santa Claus isn't real, like telling a child, the Easter bunny eggs don't really come from, a magical purple bunny. I think at one point in the debate, he said, there's so many other things to cut, the Pentagon, the CIA, all the waste that goes on the healthcare system. USAID is the one part of our government that does good. And I thought, okay, we're going to need to start from the very beginning on what USAID even is. So I really want to get like a clean version of that, because I thought it was very instructive. You could see the moments where he went, like that is kind of weird. They did that in Pakistan. They did that in Cuba. They did that in Eastern Europe. They did that in Africa. And the reason I start with that tonight is because, let me move some of these things around. Hold on a sec. Okay, I think it's good enough. Okay, so why do I start on that? How does it connect to Garry Kasparov, our subject of the day? Well, because you are going to see behind Garry Kasparov, and we'll get into who he is and how he's responsible for me being where I am and who I am today. We're going to see in the figure of Garry Kasparov a USAID story. But more than a USAID story, kind of the perfect encapsulation of how USAID is the money spigot for CIA activity. See, this is one of these things. I feel like, frankly, it wasn't even a debate yesterday. It was just kind of like a 101 lecture series to people who don't really know how it works. But one of the things that I kind of wished afterwards that I had explained when I talked about how USAID has 3 times bigger budget than CIA, and something that I think dovetails really well with what we covered in our last stream on Thursday night about the Asia Foundation. If you remember, when we covered the Asia Foundation on the stream earlier this week, we saw that the CIA created the Asia Foundation. We'll just pull it up for folks who don't remember. This is a really clean example, right? This is the organization that funded the university where Barack Obama's mother and father met. And we covered this June 1966 memo from the Central Intelligence Agency to the 303 Committee, which is, the sort of State Department NSC committee coordinating intelligence activity. So it's a memo from the CIA to state and the National Security Council, saying the Asia Foundation proposed improvements in funding procedures. The Asia Foundation, a Central Intelligence Agency proprietary, meaning it was set up by the Central Intelligence Agency directly. They don't really do this anymore, okay? This is a concept that is lost to time. This sentence you are reading here from 1966 is a mosquito in the amber, a frozen fossil of the way intelligence work used to be structured. Behold, a relic of history, never to be seen again, but to be studied, because to study it is to understand the world we inherited. See, back before there was USAID, USAID was created in 1961. You'll see that this was established in 1954. CIA was a wee wickle baby, created under the 1947 National Security Act. It was only 6 years old. Started operations in 48. In 54, it creates the Asia Foundation. Okay? This is, by the way, Radio Free Europe, the same way. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, CIA. This is all declassified. The CIA years and beyond. The Wilson Center. So this is what Kari Lake is doing battle with right now. Radio Free Europe. Let me actually pull this up because it's a funny related story. So Radio Free Europe is the giant network of affiliated media institutions that are paid for by U.S. taxpayers in order to pipe in propaganda around the world that advances U.S. interests. So that does a couple of things. Hold on a second. Let me pull this up in the bookmark so you see. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty has gone in because of we are in an undeclared second Cold War against populism. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which was set up by the CIA. Initially, both Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty were funded principally by the U.S. Congress through the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay, it was set up as a CIA proprietary. Proprietary meaning belonging exclusively to it. Just like you have proprietary intellectual property rights. If you produce a movie and you register it with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the CIA has proprietary organizations, or at least it used to, as before USAID took over that role. So, as a quick anecdote here, on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, at a time when other countries did not really have robust radio programming or print journalism of their own, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty were ways of breaking behind the Iron Curtain in order to influence the hearts and minds of the citizens to align more closely and elect governments more closely aligned with U.S. national interests versus Soviet national interests. We would tell people who to vote for, what sort of things their national assemblies should advance or not advance. We'd promote various industries or rule of law reforms or economic liberalization reforms. And it was all done through a CIA-controlled media outlet, set of outlets. We also had Radio Free Asia. One of the most important and successful policy instruments of the U.S. during the Cold War. From 1949 to 1971, it was run by the CIA. And then that became scandalous because the CIA is our spy agency. So suddenly everything Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty put out looked like, because it was actually not independent journalism, but simply propaganda piped in by spies. This is what it is. Voice of America, by the way, was in this as well. There's Tucker Carlson's dad who ran that. Tucker talks about that a lot. And because of the scandal of it being a CIA proprietary, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty went through organizational reforms to transition its ownership from the Central Intelligence Agency to an independent body called the Board of Broadcast Governors, and then to where it now resides, the U.S. Agency for Global Media. By the way, I think Kimmy sent a $5 super chat that I missed earlier. Sorry about that. I meant to read that during the music break. It looks like it's disappeared. Thank you, Kimmy, for that. And I see from KRob04, from one, Mike Ryan Matta is here and sent a chat. Oh, did I miss it? Did I miss a super chat, or is it a regular chat? Hey, Ryan, what's up, man? How you doing? So, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty was restructured. It started as a CIA proprietary. It's still around. Why does it have credibility? Why do they say they're not a spy agency anymore? They're a media outlet? Because now it's run by an independent standalone agency called the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Now, when I was in the White House in 2020, I was very close with the personnel office called PPO, Presidential Personnel Office. And the running joke at PPO was that the U.S. Agency for Global Media had the highest proportion of spooks per capita of any U.S. government agency. Basically, every journalist there, or half of the journalists there, had security clearances, were doing intelligence work under the cover of being journalists. Because as a journalist, you get access. Then you also have a platform to print propaganda, messaging, to work with all the different groups, the parliamentarians, the government leaders, the union leaders, the religious leaders, the universities, the academics. You can organize through the media. And now we're running into this crazy situation where the Trump funding pause of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Trump tried to shutter Radio Free Europe. The EU threw it a lifeline. So now this massive spy network created by the CIA and still operationally, functionally directed by the CIA, but operated independently. If you know where I'm going with this, I'm going to connect this to USAID. Is now going to have its piper, its piper calling the tune. He who pays the piper calls the tune. It will be a foreign regulatory body. Will now be controlling a U.S. spy network that we've systematically capacity built for the past 70 years. Think how fucking crazy that is. The European Union has stepped in to provide Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty an infusion of millions of dollars to keep it functioning as the international broadcaster battles the Trump administration to release funds Congress designated for it. We're grateful for the emergency funding to keep Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty afloat, the network's president, Steve Capus, said in a statement from Brussels where he'd been meeting with EU officials. Radio Liberty's survival is at risk as long as these funds are withheld, referring to the $75 million held back by the Trump administration. So the EU, the transatlantic side of the blob, has just poached a massive spy network that we've been building up for 75 years. I railed against this in a video, and I heard from various folks at U.S. Agency for Global Media about all the, I wrote, Radio Free Europe is an intelligence network, not just a media network. That's why it was run by the CIA at its founding for the first 12 years. It is inconceivable, undreamable we'd allow that network to be mainly funded by a foreign body and one who wants Trump gone to boot. I have a lot more to say about that. I've heard a lot of things from people at USAGM who have reached out to me about this. The stories they are telling me are wild. But I bring that up to say, you don't see this anymore. There are a lot of institutions that are still around today that started as CIA proprietaries. And they continue today as independent because they've shed the CIA from them. And now they'll work with the State Department. And then the State Department works with the CIA. So they maintain the patina of a firewall. But the funding from state and USAID is what gives the capacity for the CIA to liaise and direct and organize for covert action. The other example I was just going to get to right here was this. I was talking about the Asia Foundation because we just uncovered this on the last stream. So to put the button on this point, because this is an important one for the story on Garry Kasparov that will unfold over these next 3.5 hours. We don't do this anymore. We don't create CIA proprietaries anymore. Because this shit gets the CIA in trouble. It's very, very, very bad for plausible deniability to get funds from the CIA. When your checks come from Langley, when they come from the National Intelligence Center, when your paycheck has Central Intelligence Agency on it, plausible deniability is kind of tough to maintain. So this was done in the pre-USAID era because there was no U.S. aid to capacity build assets that the CIA would use and direct. When you look at the chessboard of the various assets you have in the region, a crisis has just emerged in Moldova. The prime minister, the president of Moldova, has announced they're going to pursue an economic nationalist agenda that will end up crushing large U.S. energy companies in pipeline politics and will limit NATO activities in the region. And we go, how do we covertly influence this guy or this population or this parliament or these judges to stop this initiative from going through? They don't look at the list of CIA proprietaries anymore in the region because there really are none. This was phased out in the 1960s and 70s because of all the trouble the CIA got in. The way it works now is these are USAID funded organizations or private philanthropies. And then they will work with the CIA. The CIA does not do the capacity building anymore. Do you understand? Capacity building is building up a network, building up an organization, building up an individual so that they have more capacity, so that when you instrumentalize them, they are more capable instrument. Capacity building is giving it money, giving it technology, giving it training, giving it resources, giving it weapons, giving it clout. Principally money. So that structure was phased out in, if you recall, this is the direct words of the National Endowment for Democracy. I believe it was 1986. It would be terrible for Democrat groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. We saw that in the 1960s. It's been discontinued. We have not had the capability for doing this, and that's why NED was created, the National Endowment for Democracy, founder and president. Here it is. Innocence Abroad, the new world of spyless coups. Nobody was, this is in the Washington Post, 1991. Nobody was rude enough to say so, but we don't even, when Robert Gates was up to be confirmed for head of CIA, the Washington Post says we don't even need a CIA anymore. We have the National Endowment for Democracy, which does the CIA's job. Now, that's only partially true. The covert action boys have been privatized by USAID. The sugar daddy of, now these are not overt, it's covert action cloaked as overt activity of NGOs. In 2023, all National Endowment for Democracy grants have been shielded under confidentiality. There's nothing overt about it. Carl Gershman, president of the endowment. It would be terrible for Democrat groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. That's what we did in the 1960s. It's been discontinued. Now, what he's referring to here in 1991, again, NED was created in 1983. Between 1977 and 1983, the CIA's activity here was paused because of the church committee hearings and the massacre, the Halloween massacre, and all the different cuts to the CIA's budget and capabilities that happened during the Carter administration. So he's talking about how under the Reagan administration, 1983, that's why the endowment was created. So that you don't have CIA proprietaries anymore. USAID funds them. State Department funded NGOs like NED fund them. NED is just USAID. NED literally was conceived of, again, first by CIA, by William Casey, who sent it to USAID to come up with the idea for how to structure NED. Let me show you a great quote here. USAID, NED. After some initial uncertainty from the Reagan administration hardliners, the U.S. government, through USAID, contracted the American Political Foundation to study democracy promotion, which became known as the Democracy Program, which recommended the creation of a bipartisan, that's why you have IRI and NDI, the Republican and Democrat side of NED, nonprofit to be known as the National Endowment for Democracy. Okay, so NED is USAID. It's literally USAID's idea, and USAID had that idea tasked from CIA. What I am trying to download onto you is that when Cenk said, I showed up for a debate on USAID, how did I end up in a debate on CIA? I had to laugh, because to ask that question is to not even know what USAID is. Put another way, why do you need USAID at all? Why not have just the State Department give the grants directly? The State Department funds is a co-investor in most of what USAID does. If you go to foreignassistance.gov, for example, just pick a random country. Let's just pick Sudan. We're going to get there tonight. You'll see that for year 2023 in Sudan, there are $23 million worth of State Department grants and $550 million of USAID grants. Now, these $23 million are going to be for very USAID things. Sudan humanitarian response, interagency agreement with fragile states with the U.S. Institute of Peace. So, for example, if you just look at the humanitarian response plan, which it looks like the State Department gave $12 million for, let's just pop this open, supporting UNICEF activities in response to the Sudan emergency. Well, if you just go to USAID UNICEF, you'll see USAID is all over UNICEF. UNICEF has to adopt new measures as USAID funding cuts. As USAID cuts funding. So why have separate grants for state versus USAID? Why even have USAID as an independent organization at all? Well, it's because USAID is independent. It's known internationally as just humanitarian philanthropy. And it is unaccountable. It's a black box where a state has to report things publicly. If you remember, for example, an inauguration of organized political warfare, this document, I go over in the pinned tweet on my X account. I'm going to see if I can just find the PDF real quick. So this was 2 months before George Kennan granted the CIA plausible deniability in 1948. He writes this memo called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare. Right here, declassified in 2005. Written in 1948. Kind of crazy. Took 57 years to declassify this document. It was all about the CIA, how we need the CIA to conduct organized political warfare and how the American people might not be happy with it, but we need to do it anyway. And what he was proposing was covert operations that would achieve the State Department's goals, because he was head of the State Department policy planning staff. He said this is a State Department function, but we can't house this at state. What he says is, and let me get the money quote for you. So the State Department should exercise direction and coordination. The quote I'm looking for on the budget, concealed in the budget is what it says. Okay, political warfare operations must be under unified direction of state. Aha, this is the one. Let me snip this real quick. Okay, so I'll read this. Again, this is 2 months before the CIA is given its plausible deniability license authored by the same person who did that, George Kennan. And what he writes is, while covert political warfare, covert meaning intelligence, secret, not overt by the State Department. The State Department wants to deny it if we get caught. It has to maintain plausible deniability. It says, while covert political warfare must be controlled by the Department of State, the direction should not be physically in the Department of State. Okay? So the direction would go on to be done at CIA, but accountable to state. This is the more true when it is realized that the considerable funds necessary for such an operation could not be concealed in the Department of State's budget. Therefore, this operation must find cover elsewhere. Do you see that? Do you process what this sentence means? State has to coordinate it, but direction should be given by a different agency, which would be the CIA, and funding should primarily come from a different agency, which from 1948 to 1960 was largely the CIA itself. Hence the phenomenon of the CIA proprietary, because CIA would both direct it and fund it, and then make sure that direction is consistent with what the State Department wanted. But with the advent of USAID, these two functions severed. They bifurcated. So CIA still provided direction, but the funds came from USAID. USAID took over the capacity building primarily. But CIA maintains direction, instrumentalization. What do you think Samantha Power was, by the way? Samantha Power, unmasking CIA. You guys remember this? Samantha Power in unmasker in chief. Hold on a sec. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, may share an unflattering stage with text-loving FBI agent Peter Strzok. Turned out that Samantha Power, the diplomat whose authority inexplicably was used to unmask hundreds of American names in secret intelligence reports during the 2016 election. So she was the one unmasking CIA agents, hundreds of them, during the 2016 election cycle. Samantha Power. The unmasker of CIA undercovers is who went on to be the head of USAID. It's the same thing. Corporate wants you to tell the difference between these two pictures. They're the same picture. But what I'm getting at here is when Cenk says, I came here for an argument about USAID, how did I end up in an argument about CIA? It's because CIA does not create proprietaries anymore. USAID does that, or NED does that, or a private foundation like the Carnegie Endowment or Knight Foundation or Rockefeller Foundation or other NGOs combined with USAID usually will provide the startup capital. This is how Bellingcat, for example. Bellingcat, we love Bellingcat, the CIA says. I don't want to be too dramatic, but we love Bellingcat, said Mark Polymeropoulos, who is quite a character, the CIA's former deputy chief of operations for Europe and Eurasia. Whenever we had to talk to our liaison partners about it, instead of having to have things cleared or worry about classification issues, you could just reference Bellingcat's work. Did the CIA fund Bellingcat? Is Bellingcat a CIA proprietary? No. It's a NED proprietary, which the CIA came up with in 1982 and then commissioned USAID to design how to structure NED. So this tweet, it would be terrible for Democrat groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. That's why the endowment was created. You have the CIA, the deputy chief of operations, saying we love Bellingcat. We don't need to go through a bunch of CIA bullshit. We just move straight through them. The seed investor, and at one time, I think it was half of its funding, the biggest investor for its first 5 years or so, who provided the startup capital, was the very group that said, we fund things so it doesn't embarrass the CIA. And again, NED is just USAID. Literally, USAID did the commissioning study for how to structure NED. And they always move together. Always. Wherever you see NED, you will see USAID. Wherever you see USAID, you will see NED. So, to put the button on this Asia Foundation thing that we have up, this is a perfect example to put the button, I guess, on both the Cenk thing today, yesterday, and then what we're going to move to in Garry Kasparov. So what we saw on the stream earlier this week is in 1966, June 1966, the CIA writes a memo to state and says, the Asia Foundation, a CIA proprietary, was established in 1954 to open channels in the Asian Pacific in ways not open to official U.S. agencies, to serve as a back channel for covert diplomacy and influence. Over the past 12 years, the Asia Foundation has accomplished its assigned mission, assigned by the Central Intelligence Agency. It became a widely known institution in Asia and the U.S. It is now experiencing inquiries regarding sources of funds in connection with the U.S. government from the aggressive leftist publication Ramparts. The publication Cenk probably loves. Ramparts exposed the CIA, helped give rise to the whole Church Committee takedown of CIA activity. The CIA is apoplectic that they're being exposed by a spunky group of young journalists who are putting the whole picture together. It is conceivable that Rampart's inquiries will lead to a published revelation of the Asia Foundation's CIA connection. In the present climate of national dissent, in the wake of recent critical press comment on CIA involvement with American universities, we're going to come back to those universities again, we feel a public allegation that CIA funds and controls the Asia Foundation would be seized upon. And it says with or without proof, but you'll see they concede all the proof here. And magnified beyond its actual significance to embarrass the administration and U.S. national interests at home and abroad. Now, they're not allowed to be concerned about national interests at home. They're not allowed to covertly influence U.S. interests at home. They're supposed to respond to how people vote at home. Of course, if the people vote against what they want, then they do the covert influence at home. Some immediate defensive and remedial measures are required to stop our CIA proprietary from being exposed as a CIA proprietary. In the long run, we feel the Asia Foundation's vulnerability to press attack can be reduced, and its viability as an instrument of U.S. foreign policy in Asia can be assured by relieving it of its total dependence upon covert funding from this agency, the CIA. So the CIA writes to the National Security Council and the State Department, oh shit, these independent journalists are snooping around our CIA proprietary. They're probably going to find out. We have to take immediate defensive and remedial measures to make it look like this thing was not totally dependent on covert support from the CIA. So here's what they say. In the belief that the Asia Foundation contributes substantially to U.S. national interests in Asia and can continue to contribute if viability is sustained, CIA requests the committee's study and attention to possible alternative means of supporting it. Alternative means so that it no longer be funded by the CIA. It would be funded by something else. Then we still have 6 whole pages of text that have still not been declassified. But here's a little preview. Here's what they ended up doing. The very next year, in 1967, termination of covert funding relationship with the Asia Foundation. Pursuant to the recommendations of the Katzenbach Committee, as approved by the President of the U.S., the Director of Central Intelligence has ordered that covert funding of the Asia Foundation shall be terminated at the earliest practical opportunity. In anticipation of the Asia Foundation's dissociation from the CIA, the Board of Trustees last month released to the American and foreign press a carefully limited statement of admission. Now remember, just here, the phrase was total dependence on covert funding from the CIA. But the CIA worked with the Board of Trustees of the NGO, which was actually a CIA proprietary, to carefully craft a carefully limited statement of admission of past CIA support. In doing so, they sought to delimit the effects of an anticipated exposure of agency support by American press and ensure some future expose does not seriously impair its acceptability in Asia. To continue operating in Asia with overt, private, and official support, rather than covert support from the agency. And the trustees are now prepared to attempt to acquire the necessary support for the Asia Foundation to go on as a private institution, partially supported by overt U.S. government grants. So they went, oh shit, our CIA proprietary is about to go bust. That's a big scandal. They're still very useful for CIA activity. How do we keep it going? I got an idea. We'll simply fund it by USAID. Then it'll be an overt program. We'll still be using it to advance CIA interests. We'll still be talking with everyone in the background, but now they can't trace the funding. We'll have plausible deniability. It literally switched from being a CIA proprietary, and then as soon as the CIA got busted, they kept the funding going through USAID. And now it's not a secret organization. It's not secretly working on behalf of the CIA anymore. The CIA doesn't fund it anymore. No, USAID funds it. But it reports to USAID and state about what it's doing that helps the covert operations of the CIA in the background. Do you understand what I'm saying? In the 1950s and 60s, CIA did both capacity building and directing the organizations once they had their capacities in place. Now, in order to maintain plausible deniability, USAID does the funding. So as long as there's no WikiLeaks, as long as classified cables don't leak, there's no way for journalists to know that this is being supported by USAID to help the CIA run covert operations in the country. That's why USAID exists as the capacity builder for CIA, because CIA doesn't want to get caught doing it anymore like they got caught in the 50s and 60s. That's why everything runs through USAID and NED and U.S. Institute of Peace and through their allied partner network. Now, with that stage being set, is that clear to everyone? With that stage being set, we are now going to talk about how all of these networks come together in the personage of of one Garry Kasparov.
One night in Bangkok and the world's your oyster. The bars are temples, but the pearls ain't free. You'll find a god in every golden oyster. A little special little history. I can feel an angel sliding up to me. One night in Bangkok makes a hard man humble. Not much between despair and ecstasy. One night in Bangkok and the tough guys tumble. Can't be too careful with your company. I can feel the devil walking next to me.
All right, One Night in Moscow. Let's start at the very beginning. I have a pretty exciting life. I've told you pretty much my life history, and I've mentioned this many times in interviews. But there's an opportunity now to sort of tee off on how my life intersected with this crazy character of bizarre international intrigues named Garry Kasparov. Let's pull his Wikipedia for one sec. This is a nice little romantic. This is a one night in Bangkok look. All right, let's go to his Wikipedia real quick. So we get some of these tidbits. Okay. Now, when I was a wee wickle wad, I was introduced to the game of chess, and it was one of the first things that I felt like I was a natural at. You know, I enjoyed it. I always loved games, video games, checkers. I remember I beat the principal of my elementary school in checkers. And then she had me back to the principal's office to play like 3 or 4 more times because she was upset by it. And I thought, oh, okay, this is something I'm good at. And then I sort of discovered chess. And I came of age in a very strange time in the transition of the chess world. At the time, the guy to study, I was born in 1984. The guy to study at that time, the only guy to study, if you wanted to be a high-performing chess player, you'd buy the books with his booklet of games. You'd read theory about chess. The whole chess world revolved around this one man, Garry Kasparov. He was a figure of, you can't really, it's hard to categorize, because this is all before the rise of a guy named Magnus Carlsen, whose dominance over the sport for the past 10 years has made the memory of Garry Kasparov less salient now than it was. But Garry Kasparov was the best to ever do it. He was the world chess champion for 15 years. 15 years. The best guy in the entire world. Unbroken. Try being the best in the world at something once. Then try holding it twice. Then try holding it 15 times. Let me ask, what's the longest a heavyweight champion has ever held the world title belt continuously? Let's see. Who's the number one? Okay, Joe Louis, 11 years. Wow, it's impressive. But that's way back in 1937 before things got competitive. Interestingly, number 2 is Vladimir Klitschko. By the way, these are not undisputed, right? Because there's 4 different belts. So even this is kind of misleading. But, because Vladimir Klitschko would go on to be mayor of Kiev and almost president. I think actually Vitaly Klitschko. Vitaly Klitschko only didn't become president of Ukraine after the CIA coup in Ukraine because Victoria Nuland thought he was too nationalist and so put in Yatsenyuk. This guy's brother almost became the president of Ukraine. We might have been dealing with Vitaly Klitschko instead of Zelensky. And we still may be dealing with Vitaly Klitschko. Vitaly Klitschko may end up becoming president of Ukraine one day. I think he's mayor of Kiev right now. But in boxing, let's just assume one unified belt here. Still, only 11 years. How many rings does Michael Jordan have? Michael Jordan has 6 championship rings with the Chicago Bulls. 6. So try to imagine someone 2.5 times more dominant than Michael Jordan. Garry Kasparov was the field of chess, the sport of chess. There was no close second. There was no comparison. Nobody in any sport that I know of has continuously been the best person in the world for 15 years consecutively. And because of this, Garry Kasparov was the guy that I studied when I was a kid, when I wanted to get good at chess. He had a very special place in my heart. And I started using chess engines to analyze games. You could download software. This is the pre-Stockfish era. There were chess engines you could put on your, this is before smartphones or anything. You had to download it on your desktop computer. And you could use AI to analyze games. And it became clear to me in the run-up to Garry Kasparov versus Deep Blue, seeing how good these computers were and what they'd already done to international champions and other grand champions, that as much as I loved and respected and kind of idolized the brain of Garry Kasparov, that Garry Kasparov was going to get blown the fuck out. That was like obvious to me as a kid. And I didn't feel any type of way about it. Now, the adults in the room and everybody else who I'd gotten to know at my local chess club, every single one of them seemed to think Kasparov would win and that the romantic human spirit would prevail over the cold, icy, soulless machine. And they took it almost like a spiritual attack on the character of man that I would even entertain at 16 years old. The idea that Deep Blue was probably going to kick Kasparov's ass. And I remember thinking it was weird that the adults in the chess club were insulted by me mentioning that I thought Deep Blue would win. I thought that was a very strange thing because you're 16 years old. I'm getting my driver's license. I don't even know how to parallel park. You don't know fuck all about the world. You defer to the adults in the room. They're right about everything. But I remember having this feeling before the match, like, they're not right about this. They're going to get this one wrong. And when Deep Blue won, I wasn't sad about it. I'd priced it in. You know, they say uncertainty looms larger than losses. You know, if the market knows something bad is going to happen, when the bad thing happens, The stock price doesn't go down. It's priced in. But the rest of the chess world had not priced this in. When AI chess, the era of unbroken dominance of AI chess that kicked off with the 2000 match of Deep Blue against Garry Kasparov, it took the soul out of the chess world. For a couple years after, I think like the number of people playing chess went down like some crazy percentage globally. It caused like an existential soul searching crisis about what are we even doing playing this game? We'll never be able to beat machines. To me, it didn't. This is like, are you sad that you can't outrun a Boeing 747? Are you sad you can't run faster than the Ferrari in your garage? Or, you know, are you sad that you can't outsprint a thoroughbred horse? This is just, it just is what it is. It has more power for computing than the human mind, especially in a something that can be theoretically chunked and fed into a sort of machine learning model and then baby stepped all the way by developers to get better and better over time. But this was a real moment in my youth. I felt like it was the first time I was right about something big and learned to trust my intuition, even if the adults said it was wrong. And it stuck with me the rest of my life. And then in 2016, while I was a corporate lawyer in New York City, working on hedge funds and private equity funds and big technology company mergers, briefly represented the New York Times on a deal, actually. I had a flashback. I came across I was trying to understand what was happening with internet censorship during the 2016 election. It's the first time I'd ever seen internet censorship. I was always a big writer. I was always big on spoken word stuff. I was always more of a verbal guy. And I came of age. I was born in 1984. We were the first kids to have the internet and be sentient for it before it matured. My family had an internet business. It was very important to me, this idea of the internet is for us. It's not controlled by government. It's not controlled by oligarchs. It's us. It's ours. And I was very, very unsatisfied by the explanations that people were proffering for why internet censorship was happening. Everyone was saying, oh, it's Mark Zuckerberg who's got his boot kicking down on us. It's Susan Wojcicki at YouTube. It's Jack Dorsey at Twitter. This is sort of before the word woke really took over, but it was like they're SJWs. They're social justice warriors. You know, look at this pink-haired feminist on the trust and safety team at Twitter. Look at this black hardcore far left person on the trust and safety team at Facebook. They're doing this because they just hate us for our politics and the private companies, making this decision that's just killing us. And I gobbled all that stuff up, digested it, processed it, took a swig of it, gargled it. I thought, that's only part of the explanation. I think there's something more here. And so I started to study how the censorship was being technically implemented and what the content moderators themselves were saying about techniques for content moderation, for censorship of speech. And I thought that was weird that nobody else at the time was really looking at what the censors were saying. They were looking at the censors themselves at least some of them, they were sort of complaining about being censored, but they weren't actually going into the body of theory that was being developed around the language of censor speak. Someone on the Twitter trust and safety team would come from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace or the Atlantic Council. And they'd say, okay, well, listen, they're an SJW. I go, okay, but the Atlantic Council is funded by the Pentagon and the State Department and USAID. Why does the Pentagon want this guy to act like an SJW? The Pentagon is not, not exactly known as being how is it in Raytheon's financial interest to be, hardcore SJW? At the time, we're funding ISIS in the Middle East. We're funding hardcore Islamic fundamentalists. They may have some SJW tinges, but they care about what's good for the bottom line. They care about what's good for the military and contractors. They care what's good for political elite, and they're not particularly ideological about that. So what is the Pentagon saying about content moderation? And that's when I came across the stuff that hijacked my life in late 2016, when I started looking at, initially it was DARPA grants for use of a technique called natural language processing. You guys following with me? Which is a technique for using AI to essentially make sense of language and then be able to create systems, be able to create essentially a model. You ingest tweets from Twitter. You ingest Facebook posts from Facebook. You ingest videos from YouTube and simply use the speech-to-text transliteration on YouTube in order to study the linguistics of a movement. And then you can create content moderation, censorship, simply on the basis of having effectively an engine determine whether or not that speech is good or bad. And so I started playing around. Now, this, as I learned, was initially created by the U.S. military, these NLP techniques for content moderation in linguistics. Kind of started during the Arab Spring, but it really took off in the run up to Syria in 2014, 2015. It became a huge field of financial investment by the U.S. Pentagon to study the linguistic patterns of terrorist groups. And then the Global Engagement Center, our old friend, rest in Pisces, the Global Engagement Center would then tell YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, we have scanned the internet for people who are using the linguistics of terrorist recruiting. Suspend these accounts, ban these accounts, throttle these keywords. And then in 2016, and this is where I caught onto it, I noticed a very strange thing, which was that this exact technique and these exact technologies were beginning to be used for censorship of domestic political movements, i.e. the Trump movement in 2016. I'm tempted to play here scenes from the documentary that I made on this in 2018 that I played at Steve Bannon's house before I ever entered politics. You guys want to see a little bit of this? World exclusive. Is this pacing all right? We are going to get to Garry Kasparov specifically, but we're going to do the full 4 hours. We're not even an hour and a half yet. I'm taking the scenic route because I think it grounds the story in something that is quite interesting. Okay. All right. Give me a sec here. I'm a little shy. I'm a shy guy. I did not intend to do this tonight, but it feels right. I'm going to start it. Let me see. Can I start here? How is this? Let's just start it here. Here you go. So, little backstory. So I become obsessed. I become radicalized by what I start finding in 2016. I go, holy fucking shit. This is not about SJWs at all. This is way bigger than Jack Dorsey or Susan Wojcicki or Mark Zuckerberg. You're talking about the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of War, the Department of State, USAID. You're talking about the enforcement arm of the entire American empire. That's what Trump is up against, and the Trump movement is up against, if they want to knock out internet censorship. If they want free speech, it's not they need a lot more than just getting Jack Dorsey to change his mind. And even if they get Jack Dorsey to change his mind, he will be compelled by the financial pressures that the Pentagon, the State Department, Congress, these actors will put on them. This is going to require way more than people think to take this issue on. And I was very frustrated seeing nobody else picking up on this. And it took over my life. I became completely obsessed. I could barely focus at work. Every minute of the day that I could spare, I began compiling the evidence of this. I began alienating friends and family because all I would do was talk about this. I would say, AI censorship. AI censorship. It's deep blue all over again. Humans will, because at the time, what everybody was saying is, okay, they're going to ban the word gay. We'll spell it Ghey. Ha ha. Can't censor it. I thought, no. That's not how this works at all. Someone will simply input a line of code saying that when gay is used in this linguistic pattern, it will automatically appear as a toxic speech. There's no way trying to outmaneuver AI censorship is like thinking Garry Kasparov will beat Deep Blue. And then I started going into the various AI content moderation apps or, APIs that were made available. For example, Google Jigsaw had something called Perspective API. And back in the day, what you could do, let's see if this is still around. Let's see. Toxicity score. Let's see. Back in the day, what you could do is you could literally go into, they had a page. See if I can pull it up on screen. I bet you this link doesn't work anymore, but give me a sec. I want to see if I can actually find this and just okay. I'll have to find this another time. But back in the day, what you could do is you could go to Jigsaw's website in early 2017, and you could put in any sentence, any word, any phrase, and it would spit out a toxicity score. So and what it would give you would be a number that is just like how chess engines work. Let's see if I can. Let's see. Hold on a second. I wonder if this guy's account is still there. Hold on a second. I think this guy nuked his account that I'm pulling this from. But essentially, you could put in. Oh, you know what? I know where I have it. I actually think I have it in the documentary here. Okay, whatever. I'll find another time. So you could put in, for example, Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be. And it would give you a readout that would say like 0.17 toxicity. And then it would give you, like a ethnic identity attack score, a gender identity attack score, a political extremism score, all these subscores. So it would say like 0.17. You could put in like a Tupac rap song or a Biggie Smalls rap song, and it would give you like a 0.56 toxicity. And then if you went into what content moderators in early 2017 were starting to do, is they were implementing these AI censorship techniques in order to proactively, automatically flag content on the internet without anyone even reporting it first. Because this is the other thing they said. They'll never be able to hire enough censors. Because at the time, before 2017, before Trump took office, from 2004 Facebook to 2016 Trump election, there was no automatic AI scanning of speech. AI was only used for spam and child porn. So everyone thought, oh, okay, they'll never be able to flag us all. They can't censor us all. This is what everyone was saying. And I was saying, no. This is not coming from Jack Dorsey. This is coming from the fucking Pentagon and CIA and State Department and all their donor drafter folks. The people in the New York hedge fund world that I was in at the time. And no, you're not going to be able to defeat this thing. You will not be able to outsmart, you'll not be able to wiggle room. It's not about how many people they hire as censors anymore. They don't need that. They will fine-tune the AI. And no matter what you do, as soon as a rallying cry you think is going viral, they'll tune it all the way down and get nuked. As soon as a slogan becomes popular, can't say a slogan anymore. A scandal breaks, they'll be able to kill the scandal just by tuning down the keywords associated with the scandal. There's no escape. You are not in analog romantic era chess anymore. This technology is the end of the romantic era in speech on the internet. It will do for censorship warfare what the atom bomb did to kinetic warfare. What's the reason that you can't fuck with Israel, even though it only has 8 million in population? They don't need a giant standing army. They've got a weapon of mass destruction. What's the reason that there's all this activity around trying to stop Iran from getting a bomb? Because that changes everything. Doesn't matter whether or not they have a first-class air fleet or they have enough troops in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. If they have a weapon of mass destruction, it completely changes the entire terms of engagement. You can wipe out an entire army without even having an army. So too it was with AI censorship. You don't need an army of censors. You can take out an entire political movement with just a couple of lines of code. And so I screamed about this to everyone. I said, this is just like Garry Kasparov. You think you're Garry Kasparov. You have not yet seen what Deep Blue can do. I'm spending every morning, every night, every bathroom break, every minute that's not a billable hour, reading these people working with this. I see their excitement. I see the funding behind this and how they're scaling the funding. Snap out of it. Don't be so naive. I've seen this movie before. I saw it with Garry Kasparov. And I had no way of telling that story. So I pretty much started moving out of being a lawyer and began working on a book. I figured I would tell it in a book. That would be the way I would get the story out. I'd network with people in Washington. I'd be Chicken Little screaming about how the sky was going to fall with this. They were weapons of mass deletion, I said. It's weapons of mass destruction, but for censorship. And I'll play you a little bit. So I network. I think in February 2018, I went to Steve Bannon's house, the embassy in D.C., took a train from New York, and I presented a documentary that I made to promote what I thought would be my upcoming book. I'm going to play you a couple minutes from this. So here it says, YouTube is hiring 10,000 people to police offensive videos. So YouTube, this is January 2017. YouTube is hiring 10,000 people to police offensive videos. And the next slide is why thousands of human moderators won't fix toxic content on social media. Human moderation is not enough to stop Trumpism. And this is two brains are better than one. AI and humans work to fight hate. Council on Foreign Relations. I'm sorry, I updated the video after 2018. I think I presented this in January, February 2018, and then I made a couple additional edits before I joined the White House. So, but yes, November 2018, Council on Foreign Relations, moderating online content with the help of artificial intelligence. Okay, what the fuck does the Council on Foreign Relations have to do with censoring pro-Trump speech on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and using AI to censor the Trump movement? Nobody was talking about this back then. This wasn't even, if people saw something like this, they'd be like, oh, that's weird. Well, you know, they're weird people. The Council on Foreign Relations having whole moderated panels on why we need AI, weapons of mass deletion. Of course, now I think this makes sense to most of the American public after everything that we've done, but let's keep going. Facebook increasingly using AI to scan for offensive content. Facebook to help French police identify hate speech suspects. Arrest for offensive Facebook and Twitter posts soar in London. June 2016. That was the month that Brexit happened. British police arrest at least 3,395 people for offensive online comments in 1 year. And this is Hate Lab, which is a particular fixation of mine back in the day. As you'll see, it says, a form of artificial intelligence. The dashboard uses state-of-the-art machine learning classifiers for race-related hate, religious hate, see, to ethically detect hate speech across the following categories. Now, Hate Lab got on my radar in like 2017-ish because I started tracing into what was behind Hate Lab, and it turned out it was the U.S. government. Turned out the U.S. Justice Department in consultation with the US State Department, paid for the UK to use Hate Lab in order to stop Brexit supporters. And if you look into Hate Lab, you'll see the whole focus was Brexit, 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 Brexit. That's later in the documentary that I go over here. But this was an attack by the State Department on a foreign domestic political movement through censorship, while the State Department was funding this technology in the first place, and then funding product development for foreign countries to censor opposition movements to what the State Department wanted. And again, everything was flagged proactively. Before early 2017, 0% of online speech was flagged proactively by AI. 0%. By 2019, I think it was 98% of Facebook posts were proactively flagged by AI. It went from 0 to 98 in 3 years.
Over the past 3 years, a superweapon has been in development by those at the highest level of big tech, academia, and big politics.
Over the past 3 years, a superweapon has been in development by those at the highest level of big tech, big academia, and big politics.
With this device, every word you write, every sentence you speak, is analyzed in real time by artificial intelligence. A series of algorithms analyze what you say, determines the degree to which it is offensive, and assigns your speech a number.
This is Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be.
That number is your toxicity score. And if your so-called toxicity score is high enough, your sentence gets identified in the system, flagged, and deleted from the internet. We call this doomsday device weapons of mass deletion. They are artificial intelligence algorithms operating on you right now, allowing large technology companies to monitor and censor up to millions of posts per second, all across the internet. From platforms by Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, to social media companies such as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, to message forums such as Reddit, to an ever-growing list by the day. Weapons of mass deletion have already been deployed in their early stages.
So here's Harvard. Harvard studies on automated hate speech detection. Hate Lingo, a target-based linguistic analysis of hate speech and social media using DARPA-funded technology. This is all against Trump. They didn't give a flying fig about hate speech. These are the same people who will tell you we should spend billions of dollars paying Nazi groups in the Azov battalion. It was all about getting rid of Trump, getting rid of Brexit people, getting rid of Bolsonaro in Brazil, Vox Party in Spain, AfD Party in Germany, Matteo Salvini at the time in Italy. This is what they're getting paid by USAID and DOD and state to do.
Stages, and are being refined to achieve ever more terrifying levels of power by those who seek to use them to determine the limits of freedom in the land of the free. This is the story of how this new Manhattan Project came to be, where it is going, and what you can do to stop it.
With NLP, you'll see it says there. Right, I'm going to play a little bit more. Hold on a sec. Let me know in the chat if this is fine. I know you guys are anxious to get to Kasparov, but we're taking a little bit of a detour here. You guys are getting some deep origin story stuff here. Here we go. Now, before you get to this section, the context is this is like February 2018. This stuff was still all very, very, very new. And I'm like presenting to a, senior White House. Bannon was, White House guy. He left Breitbart to be like the senior advisor at the White House and then had these sort of power scuffles and Jared Kushner kind of proxy wars and in and out. But I was now sort of professionally focused on telling this story to the world. And I wanted to present to Steve and others in Washington the threat that this was going to be China-style censorship. And what ended up getting me to join the Trump administration in the first place is that by the end of this year, everything in the next 7 minutes of this, because this is all broken into like 10 parts, had already gotten worse than China. And so I actually, at the time, I was trying to, say, listen, we're going to have a China-style censorship thing here. And then I felt that it was actually moot because much of this stuff that had not yet hit the American internet was moving so fast, just like I said it was going to, when I saw the money flowing into it, that I felt like some of this message was actually kind of obsolete by the time a book would be out, which is basically what took me into the government to try to fight my way up and build networks to take this thing on, because I thought it was too slow to publish a book after the months went by. I thought it was too slow to do a documentary. We need government policy on it now. So I'm going to play some more from this.
Until 2017, weapons of mass deletion were the province only of communist dictatorships. In China, for example, a simplified version of weapons of mass deletion has powered their system of internet censorship, routinely banning citizens from speaking words and phrases that could signify dissent from the Communist Party line. When President Xi Jinping moved to end presidential term limits, Chinese social media platforms imposed a temporary ban on the following words and phrases: I oppose, disagree, change the law, rule the world, go against the tide, Animal Farm, Brave New World, and, tellingly, 1984. Such so-called content moderation of speech online is so pervasive in China that the country's Internet Censorship Agency has composed an orchestral censorship national anthem. And this censorship works. It keeps the party in power. In a country with a population of 1.6 billion people, there is only one political party permitted in China, and any attempt at political dissent or intellectual freedom is ruthlessly crushed through the state's pervasive monitoring and censorship of alternative speech and ideological expression. China was not supposed to be an instruction manual. Until the year 2017, it was long believed that such constraints on free expression could never come to Western shores. But that was before the dawning of the era of weapons of mass deletion. In just a few short years, it has gone from unthinkable to standard protocol for Western big tech platforms to censor ideas and memes, just like in China. Except in the West, left-wing social justice orthodoxy has taken the place of the communist state.
So I'm trying to appeal right now to kind of like the Bannonite, because they all speak. One of my big issues early on was everyone was saying, oh, it's left-wing, it's SJW stuff. And it sounded too conspiratorial to say what it actually was. So this is actually one of the problems I felt in writing the book, is I felt like I had so many chapters on what the Pentagon actually does, what state actually does, what USAID actually does, that it was like too jarring to even believe the world worked that way when I would talk to my friends and family about that. So I felt like one of the reasons that I started my X account in the first place after Elon bought it was like, I just need to raise awareness about these, the dynamics of American power so that you can understand censorship and censorspeak within that power structure. Does that make sense? So a lot of this was like kind of messaging, if you will, to give it something that was understandable. But let's keep going.
While China censored ironic phrases like "Long live the Emperor," banned because it poked fun at the communist grip on power, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube have banned ironic phrases like "learn to code" because it pokes fun at biased left-wing journalists' grip on power. Big Tech banned the NPC meme, which stands for non-playable character, because the term poked fun at Marxist millennials who function like robots when uncritically repeating the messages of mainstream media. Thousands of social media accounts were banned for using the NPC meme. Facebook flagged the use of the word honk because it is used by some in right-wing circles to denote the clown world of dystopic left-wing control. While China censored cartoons like Winnie the Pooh because the character who resembled President Xi Jinping was used in memes for subversive humor, Big Tech banned thousands of accounts for using cartoons like Pepe the Frog or Honkler the Clown. In a move hearkening to the Harry Potter villain Voldemort, Facebook issued a new policy that popular but controversial news host Alex Jones may not be mentioned on Facebook except when a user is explicitly denouncing him. Every time a pretext was served up that the meme or idea promoted so-called misinformation, disinformation, or the nebulous catch-all hate speech. China has its own pretexts too, but we'd never have anything like that here, right?
Remember, I did this 7 years ago. I know some of it seems cringe now, but
ADL and the University of California at Berkeley's D-Lab have been working to develop a new approach to tackle online hate using the latest methods. The goal of the Online Hate Index is to help tech platforms better understand the growing amount of hate on social media and to use that information to address the problem.
Dave, remember, in 2017, 2018, misinformation was still relatively new as a censorship. In fact, it wasn't used as a censorship category. It was being floated in the press, but they were usually using hate speech and targeted abuse and harassment as the primary way to take out Trump supporters. And this was very obvious when, for example, Facebook and PayPal banned anything that questioned open borders. And this is also before the sort of cultural counter-revolution against, like SJW, social justice warrior, woke stuff, made hate speech a less sort of tenable concept. And they've moved to a much more broad and powerful idea that misinformation or disinformation or even malinformation, true information, is censorable in its own right. But let's just keep going here.
By combining artificial intelligence and machine learning with social science, the Online Hate Index will ultimately uncover and identify trends and patterns in hate speech.
But you'll see, like, what they do here is, so the ADL in 2017 is saying that they're using AI. You guys see this here? This says, look, the targets, the Donald, and guns are cool. This has nothing to do with hate speech. They're trying to take out Trumpism.
Patterns in hate speech across different platforms. We've just completed our first phase of research, and we found that the machine learning model identified hate speech.
So again, it's all using AI by like late 2017 when this, I think, when they produced this. And this is all DARPA technology. This is DARPA technology to catch terrorists, repurposed at the time by groups like the ADL to go after Trump supporters. I could not believe no one was talking about this.
Speech accurately between 78 and 85% of the time.
Let me translate what this means. In this image, you can see a simplified version of weapons of mass deletion in action. In China, you can say the words China arrests human rights and defenders, but when you string them together in a sentence and type the phrase over Chinese Messenger, the message does not go through. Beginning in 2017, American big tech corporations began adopting a similar technique against their own citizens.
The standard approach to machine learning for hate speech would be the binary outcome. So is it hate speech, yes or no? So someone makes a comment on Twitter and it goes into this AI model, and maybe the research team or Facebook or Twitter, or perhaps it's a legal case, asks the algorithm, is that hate speech? And the algorithm says, that's 37% hate speech. And it has a very fine-grained.
Now, you see here, let me pull this up so you guys can see. It says the comment appears to have strongly negative sentiment, 60% certainty, likely threat of violence, 85%, identity group, 99, humiliating. Based on this, I estimate it at 2.5 on the basis of a hate speech scale, plus or minus 0.3. This is exactly what a chess analysis looks like. Okay? Let me show you that so that you see it. I'm going to pull up a chess analysis engine real quick. So, for example, when you go to a chess engine and you put in the games, okay? So this game, for example, you'll see that they are on move 4, right? You had probably pawn to e4, pawn to e6, pawn to d4, or I guess, no, you probably had pawn to e4, knight to f6, pawn to e5, knight to d5, pawn to e4, pawn to e6. So now we're on move 4. And the chess analysis engine, it's worked this way since the 1990s. The engines are just better now, but it read the same way. And you'll see, using the same AI machine learning technique, it gives you a reading. It says in this position right here, if you play c4 as the next move, that is this pawn up 2 spaces, it analyzes that white is up 1 1/15 of a pawn. The second best move is to play knight to f3. And in that resulting position, the engine assesses white is winning by a pawn and an 11 100ths of a pawn. If you play the third best move, pawn to a3, then white is winning by 92 100ths of a pawn. And so every possible move on the chessboard can be broken down into a number that tells you what to do and what every variation will result in. So too it is, as we see, with the AI censorship technology in 2017, 2018. They estimate the position at a 2.5 plus or minus 0.3. And so every variation of every word can be put into a censorship algorithm without having to be flagged by a censorship operative. Okay, let's keep going.
Understanding of the comment, it says, well, it looks like it has negative sentiment based on all the other training data I've seen, and I feel pretty certain about that. I'm very certain that it's a violent threat. It definitely has an identity group target, and it looks to be humiliating. So then based on aggregating that with the IRT parameters, it then can automatically convert it into the hate speech score. So it would be 2.5 plus or minus 0.03.
This is what censorship looked like, okay? In 2017, 2018, before the whole thing scaled and took out the Trump movement ahead of 2020, this is what it all looked like. Thousands and thousands of videos from every major university funded by state or USAID or DOD. At the forums that would bring together the trust and safety teams from Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. This is what it looked like. Highly technical censor speak and implementation of censorship models. It did not look like, SJW, like psychobabble about racism. It was highly technical. For folks who've been sub for a while, you know that I talk about how the way censorship teams are structured is you will have a political who sets the direction, and then you will have the quant. You guys remember the quant? How many people in the chat remember the quant?
That's my quant.
Your what?
My quant.
1 second.
A lot of these triple Bs are going to 0 too. And that, you're too close, is an opportunity.
Okay, you're saying that at 8% the bonds fail and we are already at 4%?
That's right.
If they go to 8, it's Armageddon.
Yeah, that's right.
How come nobody's talking about this?
You're completely sure of the math.
Look at him. That's my quant.
Your what?
My quantitative. My math specialist. Look at him. You notice anything different about him? Look at his face.
That's pretty racist.
Look at his eyes. I'll give you a hint. His name's Yang. He won a national math competition in China. He doesn't even speak English. Yeah, I'm sure of the math.
Actually, my name's Jiang, and I do speak English. Jared likes to say I don't because he thinks it makes me seem more authentic. And I got second in that national math competition.
So you're offering us a chance to short this pile of blocks?
This is what was happening in the background of everything. This is how, because if a censorship dictate goes out in 2017, okay, we want to short circuit the Trump movement's ability to popularize opposition to open borders. There's not enough human moderators, censors that you can hire to take those out. The magic was done because the quants put them into AI using DARPA technology to do it. And they were also getting funded by the Pentagon and State Department and USAID. This is where the fight was actually taking place while everyone was, just complaining about what was happening. So my solution to the people I would make friends with in Washington is you have to go over you have to take out the source of funding for the quants. You have to take out the State Department funding, the USAID funding, the DARPA funding, the National Science Foundation funding. This is what you need to shut down. And you need to shut down the top-down pressure on the CEO class, the trust and safety team class. But let's keep going.
Be 2.5 plus or minus 0.03.
This is not a theoretical problem. We already have bots censoring speech in the sense of an automatic system that takes down people's content. And these are programs used by companies like Facebook and Google.
For example, we took down 2.9 million pieces of hate speech in Q3. We also...
Okay. You're going to see, this is the guy in charge of the content moderation team at Facebook, and they are talking at Stanford University in 2018. Stanford University, who would go on to create the Stanford Internet Observatory, which they all blame me for getting shut down. It's so funny. I would meet all of these characters. I started off writing about them, chronicling them, getting to know them better than my closest friends. And then I would end up confronting, I would become a character in the book I was writing, in the documentary I was making. It was, but okay, let's keep going here.
Say things like the proactivity rate, so the rate at which artificial intelligence is helping accelerate and inform those decisions. So I believe the latest number on hate speech is 52% of hate speech that we remove is proactively identified.
That was in 2018. By late 2019, early 2020, it was up to 98. They scaled it from 0 to 52 in a year and a half.
Which means prior to a Facebook user reporting it to us.
So it went from 0% of being proactively flagged to 52% in a year and a half. All speech takedowns on Facebook.
We're trying to go much farther. If we, for example, have classified you as a misinformation repeat offender and are therefore systematically demoting your content going forward, you can see that in this new service.
So who's exercising this godlike power of censorship?
See, this is Andy O'Connell, head of content distribution and algorithm policy at Facebook.
This is Facebook's head of algorithm policy. who took this post fresh off 5 years with the Obama administration.
And you see where he was in the Obama administration? He was at the U.S. State Department. He goes straight from the Obama State Department to running the State Department used military-funded censorship technology that the Obama State Department was using to take out terrorists, to get terrorists censored on Facebook and Twitter. He goes straight from the State Department to ending free speech on Facebook. This is not Mark Zuckerberg. This is a lieutenant running this operation. Zuckerberg probably had no fucking clue the extent of what was going on. He just wanted to make the government happy and delegate it to Andy O'Connell. It's the State Department, stupid.
Determining the boundaries of your political speech.
It's part of this larger vision of taking a research activist stance.
A research activist stance. These are the researchers. But she knows they're actually censorship activists, political activists.
Which means you could be anywhere within that spectrum of 100% just research or truly from an activist perspective.
So, as you'll see, this is the Berkeley D Lab, the Berkeley Censorship Lab, the Data Lab that was partnered with the State Department, with Google Jigsaw. Google Jigsaw, who was a State Department operation. It was Jared Cohen from the policy planning staff at the State Department who invented this whole concept of State Department and CIA use of social media. We've been over that many times. Working directly with the Berkeley Censorship Lab. And she's saying we're recruiting people into this lab who are 100% researchers or 100% activists or anywhere in between. So if you're a political activist who wants open borders, we'll bring you in and you'll help advise the quants.
That's Claudia Von Vacano, project lead for one of the next generation automatic hate speech detectors that Facebook and Google are financing.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there's like 10 parts to this, so I don't want to like spend the whole thing on this. Let's transition back to Garry Kasparov. But this is my origin story, guys. This is why I'm here today, is because of Garry Kasparov. So with that said, I do need to run to the bathroom real quick. Okay, we'll do this. You guys are getting some deep, deep lore shit. I have never showed even a fraction of that before.
A bullet from the back of a bush took Medgar Evers' blood. A finger fired the trigger to his name. A handle hid out in the dark. A hand set the spark. Two eyes took the aim behind a man's brain. But he can't be blamed. He's only a pawn in their game. The South politician preaches to the poor white man. You got more than the blacks, don't complain. You're better than them, you've been born with white skin, they explain. And the Negro's name is used, it is plain, for the politician's gain. As he rises to fame, and the poor white remains on the caboose of the train. But it ain't him to blame, he's only a pawn in their game. The deputy sheriffs, the soldiers, the governors get paid. And the marshals and cops get the same. But the poor white man's used in the hands of them all like a tool. He's taught in his school from the start by the rule that the laws are with him to protect his white skin, to keep up his hate so he never thinks straight about the shape that he's in. But it ain't him to blame, he's only a pawn in their game.
He's only a pawn in their game. He's only a pawn in their game. He's only a pawn in their game. He's only a pawn in their game. From king to pawn. The story of Garry Kasparov. So, Garry Kasparov, as I mentioned, was kind of an idol figure for me. I bought all his books when I was, I think in college and afterwards, in a book called How Life Imitates Chess or something like that. Let's see, How Life Imitates Chess. Yeah, this is. I thought it was so cool. You know, it's like I'm getting all these life lessons. I guess I was a sophomore in college or something like that. I remember reading this at the University of Pennsylvania, Barnes and Noble. Thinking I'm becoming so worldly. You can do more than just chess to the chess player. Look, Garry Kasparov is making the right moves. He's retired from chess playing, but now he's in the boardroom. Maybe I can be in the boardroom one day if I just learn how life imitates chess. From Garry Kasparov. Then a funny thing happened. Kasparov started getting weird. Started getting real weird, man. And I remember when Kasparov started getting political and became, for a time, this very, very high-profile figure in Russian politics. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, let's talk about this. Philip McElroy says the Boris Spassky fan club will not enjoy this. Actually, let's get to that a little bit later. We're going to talk about Spassky in 1972. I think it's a useful lens for understanding the geopolitics of chess. But let's get back to our master document here. But we had some like weird back and forths in this time because Kasparov has become a hardcore Russiagator, never remove Trump from power. Trump's a dictator. He was completely psycho against Trump from the beginning, early on, like 2017, I think even 2016, like insane frothing at the mouth stuff. In fact, why don't I show, just to show how, like a preview of how insane Kasparov's takes are. Here's him with Charlie Sykes. This is 1 month ago, May. Garry Kasparov, the Putinization of America. And it's all about how Trump has Putinized America. You know, the same thing we saw in the Council on Foreign Relations language. And just to show you how fucking insane Kasparov is, like good on the chessboard, like schizophrenic crazy outside of it. Charlie Sykes, who's a rabid, never Trump or Russiagator guy himself, asks Kasparov, let's just play it. Let's see.
Outright oligarchy.
So what is it about? I mean, we've talked about this endlessly, but what is it about Vladimir Putin that fascinates Donald Trump? There's a connection between them. Do you have a theory about it? It's not just that, until you tell me if you disagree, it's not just that Trump admires, likes Vladimir Putin. He really wants to be like him. He does.
This is not during Russiagate. This is like a month ago. They were like this during Russiagate too, but like they're not over it. They're still doing Russiagate.
Does seem to be modeling himself on it. What is the nexus there, do you think?
look, we can speculate about some hidden facts, and I'm not here to surprise your audience with some revelations. But as somebody who grew up in the Soviet Union, I would be very surprised if to learn that in 1987, an American flamboyant millionaire visiting Soviet Union
He's talking about Trump's visit to the Soviet Union in 1987 for a potential real estate deal. And he's about to insinuate that the KGB in 1987 recruited Donald Trump as a Manchurian candidate for him to become president 30 years later in 2016.
With his Czech wife was not a target of KGB recruiting activities. Okay. Whether they succeeded or not, I don't know. But naturally they tried. Trump was an ideal. It's like from a book, you tick every box, the money.
Yeah, a fucking fantasy book, you psycho.
Real estate, casino, women, everything. And how many bankruptcies? And some of them were just, quite painful. And it's always, just Trump always, recovered. It's almost like a mystery, like a phoenix, just out of ashes. Again, it's all, consequential. It's all coincidences. I used to say that I believe in coincidences. I also believe in KGB. But I think the most important thing is that what you said, he loves Putin because he wants to be Putin. This is the right. That's in Trump's blood. Whatever connection KGB had or not, it's Trump's nature. So
the KGB recruited Donald Trump in 1987, carefully cultivating him over the course of 30 years to install him as a pro-Russian president. That's the move Garry Kasparov played. Maybe a grandmaster at chess, but kind of a grand buffoon in the game of life. But where does this come from? Why is Charlie Sykes talking to Garry Kasparov in 2025? Why does anyone care? With takes as dumb as these, why does anyone care what Garry Kasparov has to say? And when we go through the whole history of this, you'll see that he's been everywhere. He's writes for the Wall Street Journal. He's at Yale. He's at Harvard. He's at the Carnegie Endowment. He's at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's at multiple USAID-funded NGOs. Why do they care about Garry Kasparov's takes? Well, and let's just go through the sort of predictable thing about what are Garry Kasparov's takes, for example. Here's Michael McFaul. But so Michael McFaul writes, in 2012, when I was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Putin shut down USAID in Russia. Why? Because USAID's work supported free markets, democracy, human rights. Now, again, Michael McFaul is the head of the Freeman Spigoli Institute at Stanford, which houses the Stanford Internet Observatory. Michael McFaul was Rene DiResta's boss, Alex Stamos' boss. That's the center most proximally responsible for censorship of mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines and early voting drop boxes and speech about election fraud in the 2020 election. They went after tens of millions of tweets, Facebook videos, Facebook posts, YouTube videos. This is all under Michael McFaul, who was the Russiagate guy, U.S. ambassador to Russia, the head of the State Department for all things Russia for Obama. And Michael McFaul was so fucking stupid about how aggressive the coup efforts were by the Obama State Department and the Obama USAID that he fucked around and got all of USAID expelled from Russia. Okay? So even if you believe in USAID, you don't want USAID to be so aggressive that a country kicks you the fuck out. Well, Michael McFaul did that. Could not keep the coup craft in his fucking pants. Now, we're going to get back to this and McFaul on this. But Michael McFaul is old friends with our friend Garry Kasparov. Again, all this popped off. Remember, like I sort of set in motion this series of events that ended up getting USAID shut down. So I was monitoring all this traffic at the time. I see Michael McFaul and Garry Kasparov talking about the USAID announced shutdown. Garry Kasparov said, I had my quibbles about how USAID allocated money when it was in Russia, but when the worst regimes on earth are celebrating something you've done, some reflection is in order, unless your goal was to make them happy. Basically, Kasparov is saying you're making Putin happy by shutting down USAID. And let's just go to a couple more, like just so you see Garry Kasparov, USAID. This is Garry Kasparov in 2012 when it was being kicked out. So Russia in September 2012 kicked USAID out of the country because Hillary Clinton and Michael McFaul were too aggressive about coup-craft. They were too actively sponsoring street protests, riots, breakdowns of society in Russia. Russia knew that USAID was behind it, so they kicked him out, even though we were giving them like $100 million or whatever, $50 million a year. You'd think they'd want a free $50 million to help their economy, but that's not what it was. It was to oust him, just like the USAID to Brazil was to oust Bolsonaro. That's why USAID funding spiked and doubled, more than doubled during the Bolsonaro years in Brazil. It wasn't to help. They really wanted to help Bolsonaro's economy. No, the money was all going to political opposition to get him out. Kasparov claimed that USAID did a poor job tracking most of the grants in Russia. Oh, darn. Oh, darn. We just lost track of all the money we were laundering into the country. We don't know how it ended up in the hands of all the Putin opponents. But what's really interesting is the words of the Russia State Department equivalent, their foreign ministry, justify the move by alleging that USAID was aiming to influence the Russian political process. Do you guys remember the name of the infamous State Department program I keep giving a shout out to? So again, the reason USAID was kicked out is because it was baselessly alleged, that they were trying to influence the political process in Russia. I'm wondering if who in the chat can predict what I'm about to say. What was the program that coordinated internet censorship activity across all of the State Department and USAID's equities? The political process. The CEPS program. The Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. So the money is to manipulate the political process in the frigging name of the program. Manipulating the political process. Yeah. Obviously, they're manipulating the fucking political process. The USAID program is called manipulating the friggin' political process. $10 from Callie Devi. Susanna Vega Night Moves. Oh, interesting. You know, I got night moves. Okay, I'll tee that up in another tab here for the next music interlude. I'm thinking Bob Seger night moves. But okay, I'll give that a try. I don't think I've heard that before. Okay, but let's get back to this. 1 second. Okay, so, and again, this was the program, if you remember.
Information has invaded online conversations on social media platforms, posing challenges to healthy information environments and threats to democracy.
Yeah, this one. So here you go. Countering disinfo.
Disinformation.
And you saw that was USAID and CEPS and NDI and IRI from NED and the State Department. USAID is paying for this.
Disinformation has invaded online conversations on social media platforms, posing challenges to healthy information environments and threats to democracy. It bolsters authoritarians, weakens democratic voices and participation, exploits and exacerbates existing social cleavages, and silences opposition. Countering disinformation and promoting information integrity are necessary priorities for ensuring democracy can thrive.
This is what they want, a raised fucking fist. When they say democracy, a big fucking fist in your face. This is what they mean by political process strengthening. Censoring anyone who challenges their CIA-backed opposition movement. Ahem, Garry Kasparov, as we're going to get to. Okay? And this video we've watched 100 times, but it's just insane.
The CEP's Countering Disinformation Guide is a resource including 9 thematic sections and a comprehensive database of interventions, highlighting various approaches for advancing information integrity and strengthening societal resilience to disinformation and other harmful online campaigns. The International Foundation for Electoral Systems, International Republican Institute, and National Democratic Institute,
those are all NED,
developed this guide with support from USAID through the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening.
Every single one of those organizations is a CIA front. This entire thing is because they don't want to pay for it directly at CIA. So these CIA pass-throughs, the CIA proxies, NED, USAID, their joint program CEPs are going to build up the institution so it can achieve the covert political warfare, organized political warfare for the CIA-backed opposition group, which was Garry Kasparov, by the way, when Kasparov ran for president against Putin. We're going to go through that whole history. But you'll see what they do is they say disinformation is a whole of society. Right? This is all political process strengthening. To manipulate the political process to censor anyone who supports the regime, who they call authoritarian, and only let people see stuff from the CIA-backed opposition group. So USAID was kicked out of Russia, and there's simply no way to deny that that's what USAID was doing, and we can go over a million examples of that when we get to the history section part of this. So I'm just closing out some tabs. You'll see that AI. Deep Blue, but for censorship, was processing 500 million censorship requests daily. That's the scale. Okay. Back to, where were we? Were we over here? Yeah. Okay. So we're here. So we just covered this. So they were manipulating the political process. Okay. Now, what I want to do, we're going to get through all this, but what I want to do is start with a conversation that I've been having with ChatGPT. So I had resisted ChatGPT for a long time because I hate Sam Altman. I think OpenAI is evil. And I ultimately want to use Grok. And I support Grok. And, you know, I buy the super premium, whatever, X stuff. But for the time being, I was introduced to this O3 ChatGPT model, and it is very useful for a researcher in my position in a way that has a kind of level of detail and the ability to make like auto generate charts and graphs that Grok is not there yet. And so I'm simply going to lead you through a conversation I've been having with, you know, it's funny, you really need to finesse it because it will give you, you know, ChatGPT is completely censored, and you need to sort of smooth talk it in order to make it look like you're arguing against your own argument in order to get the good stuff out. It's kind of a funny thing. But I was persuaded this week of its potential for stuff in my work, and I've been playing around with it. And it is a great, I use the O3 rather than O4 because it's this is like the advanced reasoning one, and you can have it like you know, generate reports and things like that. So I'm just going to lead you through this conversation as I was pulling together this, because what I'm trying to impress on you in the figure of Garry Kasparov is how it is that the CIA and the State Department and USAID and all of the state and USAID funded NGOs all coalesce around a opposition political figure in a country whose government they're trying to overthrow. And the Garry Kasparov case study is phenomenal for understanding how and why that happens. Okay, so I said, give me a detailed breakdown of Garry. Can you guys all see this on screen? I said, give me a detailed breakdown of Garry Kasparov's involvement in domestic politics in Russia and work with the international NGOs from his start in politics to present. Okay, so it says, once the world's top-ranked chess grandmaster, has been a prominent figure in Russian opposition politics and international human rights advocacy since the early 2000s. Below is a detailed breakdown of his involvement in domestic Russian politics and international NGOs, including key events, affiliations, and strategic activities. So, domestic politics in Russia, 2004 to 2013. And the nice thing about this is they provide all the citations at the end and then throughout that are really helpful to kind of validate the stuff. And we'll get into the citations as relevant throughout this. So 2004, 2005, transition from chess to politics. So in 2005, so that is now 20 years ago, Kasparov officially retired from professional chess to focus on political activism. So he lost his world championship in 2000, but he was still, number 2, number 3, number 4 in the world. 2005, he drops out of chess to focus on political activism inside Russia. He became a vocal critic of Vladimir Putin, accusing the regime in 2005 of authoritarianism and centralizing power. In 2005 to 2007, United Civil Front and the Other Russia. United Civil Front, founded in 2005, goal, promote democracy. 2005, 20 years ago. Civil liberties and rule of law in Russia. We're back to the rule of law programs, the USAID rule of law programs. Focused on uniting liberal and democratic opposition forces to defeat Putin. The Other Russia coalition. So in 2006, he formed a loose anti-Kremlin coalition inside Russia, including nationalists, leftists, and liberals. So this is where you get the Alexei Navalny crowd, okay? Right-wing nationalists flanking Putin from the right, as well as leftists and liberals flanking Putin from the left. Okay, this is like, for example, the Blob recruiting both Democrats who oppose Trump for leftist reasons, but also neocon Republicans who flank Trump from the right. Kasparov served as figurehead and key organizer, notable for organizing dissenters' marches in 2006-2007, which were often met with police crackdowns. Any long-term subs here getting flashbacks, memories? Memories, all alone in the moonlight. This is what the Blob does. It's what they always do. Mostly peaceful protests. Some Molotov cocktails thrown in police cars. Breaking some windows. What's more important is the police crack down on them, which only shows they're authoritarian and why they should be sanctioned. Kicked off the U.S. dollar, targeted sanctions against the police, international coalitions, renegotiation of trade agreements and economic relations. Belarus. Why are you partnering with a country who's attacking democracy by cracking down on peaceful protests? Garry Kasparov, the riot organizer. 2007, arrest in attempted presidential bid. In November 2007, Garry Kasparov was arrested during a protest in Moscow. Attempted to run for president in Russia in 2008, but was blocked because of political interference from Putin. Putin knew that if Garry Kasparov was on the ticket against him, Garry Kasparov would win the majority of votes. Garry Kasparov would be president of Russia right now. If only USAID had its way, we would be under President Garry Kasparov in Russia. And then what do you think would have happened with Russian foreign policy? What do you think would have happened with Russia's oil and gas? What do you think would have happened with Russia's rare earths? Russia has the most natural resources of any country on planet Earth. The U.S. is only 45 trillion. Russia is 75 trillion. Oil, gas, platinum, everything. They've got almost twice the natural resources we do. What do you think would have happened under President Garry Kasparov, backed by USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy and the U.S. State Department? With Kasparov the pawn as president, the 45 would swallow the 75, if only. We'll get to that. 2008-2012, marginalization of opposition. The Russian government tightened control over the political space. Kasparov continued to criticize the regime, but had increasingly limited ability to organize domestically inside of Russia. So he focused on building international support, internationalizing the war on Putin there. 2012-2013, final years in Russian politics. In 2012, he once again, street protests, the Bolotnaya Square protests. And then in 2013, so again, more riots, more protests. Good friends with Michael McFaul in 2012, who was the ambassador. 2012, USAID gets kicked out of the country, and Garry Kasparov's on the first flight out of town. USAID gets kicked out, Garry Kasparov leaves. Crazy timing, right? 2013, leaves Russia, citing fears of arrest and participating in opposition activities and speaking out internationally, so he moves to New York City, home of the hedge funds, where he still is today. What happens after that? Okay. So he starts the Human Rights Foundation as chairman in 2012. Human Rights Foundation is a U.S.-based NGO focused on global human rights and promoting liberal democracy. He leads initiatives against authoritarian regimes. Remember, this guy knows fuck all, right? He spent the first 50 years of his life in a room by himself playing chess, including the Oslo Freedom Forum. He frequently speaks out against every country the State Department wants to regime change. Suddenly, he's an expert on China. He's an expert on Venezuela. He's an expert on Cuba. You noticing a pattern here? In 2017, year one of Trump, he founds the Renew Democracy Initiative, RDI. It's a nonprofit, don't you know? It's not CIA proprietary. It's a nonprofit NGO based in the U.S., promoting liberal democracy and countering authoritarianism and political extremism. Hey, weren't you just working with right-wing nationalists like 7 years ago? Recruiting people who thought that Russia was too Muslim and wanted to balkanize Russia and kick all the Muslims out. And weren't you political extremism, huh? Oh, you just mean Trumpism. Okay. The Renew Democracy Initiative. The board includes Anne Applebaum. Anne Applebaum, board member at the National Endowment for Democracy, and busted, flat, broke, and busted in the Integrity Initiative. I believe I have a thread that's at like 2 million views on Ann Applebaum. I'll just leave this in the chat for you guys. Ann Applebaum, that's British intelligence, okay? She was literally busted in a British intelligence operation called the Integrity Initiative, which is fucking crazy, okay? Check it all out in this thread. On the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, alongside Victoria Nuland, doing covert, I don't know, can you guys read the training manuals they were assigned for this covert British intelligence operation? Political warfare, political warfare, political warfare, political warfare, political warfare, political warfare. Do I need to remind you what the Central Intelligence Agency was also set up to do covertly, just like the covert British intelligence-backed Integrity Initiative, starred by Ann Applebaum? Do you notice a similarity, for example, between this image from Ann Applebaum's reading materials in the covert operation sponsored by British intelligence, the Christopher Steele Network, and Chris O'Donnell and Chris Donnelly and Richard Dearlove, head of MI6? Political warfare, political warfare, political warfare, political warfare. I'm sorry. Why did George Kennan say we needed to create the Central Intelligence Agency in 1948? For political warfare, political warfare, black psychological warfare, political warfare. That's who you are co-founding your 2017 countering political extremism and authoritarian governments like Trump, who had just gotten elected. Very curious, Garry Kasparov. Very curious. And also dissidents from Cuba and Iran. Now he's an expert in Iranian politics. Speaks at major international venues, the Munich Security Conference, the World Economic Forum, various universities, Harvard, Yale, Oxford. It's like the biggest CIA recruiting center universities, the biggest CIA back channels, shadow diplomacy places. Collaborated with groups such as Freedom House, the National Endowment for Democracy, the Open Russia Foundation. Open your butthole to Wall Street and London. We're going to get more on that later. Open society, open Russia. Regular op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, The New York Times. Russian government response and rhetoric. He's frequently demonized by Russian state media as a foreign agent, a CIA tool, or traitor. They know. Shut it down. They know. Accused by pro-Kremlin voices of cooperating with Western intelligence and NGOs to destabilize Russia. No. That's Russian disinformation. Never formally charged, but has stated that he fears arrest if he returns home. So, this is the chronology we just went over. So he evolved from a domestic political dissident to a global symbol of liberal resistance to authoritarianism. He became marginalized in Russian internal politics right after USAID was forced out of the country. So he went upstream from Russia to working internationally to surround Russia. International NGOs, media, and diplomacy. Shadow diplomacy. So I asked a more targeted question. By the way, I do want to check this out real quick about some of these protests. And if you remember, this was the same thing with Alexei Navalny. Navalny was brought to Yale. Same place as Garry Kasparov, Yale, by the way, as well as the Harvard Kennedy School. But we're going to get to that because it was the Maurice Greenberg School. Maurice Greenberg, here you go. Just like Kasparov was brought over into these networks, so was the other rent-a-riot organizer in Russia, Alexei Navalny. Opposition leader groomed at CIA HQ University Yale into the Maurice Greenberg World Fellows Program. Maurice Greenberg was the AIG chief. Bill Clinton asked to be CIA director in 1995. Maurice Greenberg turned it down, just like Tom Donilon turned down being CIA director from Joe Biden. That's why Joe Biden went with Bill Burns. In order to keep running the BlackRock Investment Institute, Tom Donilon turned that down in 2021. Maurice Greenberg, similarly, running AIG, the biggest insurance company, and Maurice Greenberg was doing basically intelligence work through FIRE, financial, insurance, and real estate money laundering shit. You can look this up, Maurice Greenberg and the CIA. That's who this is. Their World Fellows program is named after. The guy who Bill Clinton asked to be the Central Intelligence Agency director. So Alexei Navalny was brought there. The leader of the Russian opposition after Garry Kasparov fled the country. Garry Kasparov handed the baton to Alexei Navalny. Also ran for president against Putin, just like Kasparov. The Yale CIA Asset Recruiting Center brags that he's got 3.5 million subscribers on his YouTube channel. He's got a big reach, guys. We can use him. He's a useful asset. I believe that one of the main problems in modern Russia is corruption. I focus on combating it using all available methods, conducting investigations, publicizing facts about abuses of power, and organizing peaceful protests. Thank you, CIA training school. What do you think they learned there? Civil resistance, nonviolent action. Making a martyr for the cause, as the 1983 CIA Rent-a-Riot handbook we noted goes over. Now, just because Hollywood is so funny, the documentary about Navalny won the Oscar for Best Documentary. Oscar. Hollywood and the CIA, baby. But let's get back to this. I want to look at these Bolotnaya Square protests. Let's just go to YouTube. I'm just curious about what the coverage of these Garry Kasparov organized protests were.
Thousands of opposition activists have taken part in an authorized rally in Moscow to mark the 5-year anniversary since the Bolotnaya Square protest. The 2012 anti-government demonstration was marked by violence, with police
marked by violence. The ones that he had organized in 2008?
With police detaining scores of protesters.
Oh no, I thought they were peaceful protests. Hold on a second. Protesting voter fraud. Putin only won by fraud. Of course, you allege that here. They take you out. Or is it 2007? Russia to question Kasparov over biting policeman. Here he is being carried out at one of his peaceful protests. Here's our hero. Brought to you by USAID.
Будет тюремным сроком. Он встретится с нами, с народом России.
Brought to you by USAID. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right, let's get back to this, okay? So, I said, give me a detailed breakdown of Kasparov's involvement in domestic politics work the international NGOs from his start in politics to present. What groups did he work with or speak with that were U.S. government funded NGOs? How clearly did Kasparov's message or actions match or positively advance directly or indirectly the State Department's apparent goals in Russia through 2004 to present. So in 2005, he retired from chess to transition to opposition politics, joking that he would be far busier as a retiree. He quickly founded the United Civil Front, a social movement with the explicit goal of preserving electoral democracy in Russia. Kasparov vowed to restore democracy by reinstating rule of law, signaling his commitment to core liberal principles. The United Civil Front, by the way, that word, that phrase harkens back to the Otpor 1999 style. What you need is a united front. Doesn't matter whether or not you agree with each other. You can be united as a front to put forward one person to topple the dictator. Put aside your differences and all band together. This is the sort of thing that USAID and state mobilizes. It became, and look at this. The United Civil Front became a platform to mobilize pro-democracy Russians. Remember, Putin was democratically elected. This is only 5 years into Putin's rule. Putin came to power in 2000. We're going to go through the whole history. And to denounce the Kremlin's authoritarian tendencies. Within a year, Kasparov's United Civil Front joined a broader opposition coalition called the Other Russia. The Big Tent coalition united liberals, nationalists, leftists, in opposition to Putin's regime. Strange bedfellows, as they like to say. Kasparov was instrumental in creating the Other Russia, which openly opposed Putin's government and the ruling United Russia Party. Mainstream liberal parties inside of Russia boycotted the coalition due to the inclusion of radical groups. The CIA loves this shit. Get the radicals because they're the ones who are willing to take to the streets. They'll do crazy shit. But, you know, if it achieves regime change, all will be forgiven by the State Department. The State Department will encourage that. So literally, he's bringing groups that are considered too radical, not for Putin's party, but for the liberal left folks in Russia. Probably those nationalists who, like I said, were kind of ethno-nationalist in Russia and had kind of a bad reputation given the kind of ethnic soup, the kind of delicate ethnic soup that Russia has. From the outset, Kasparov's agenda for democracy promotion, rule of law, and free elections aligned closely with Western and U.S. calls for political openness in Russia. As early as 2005, wow, that's the same year, the U.S. State Department's statements on Russia emphasized the need for fair elections and civil society, goals Kasparov's movement explicitly championed. His public stance placed him in de facto alignment with U.S. democracy promotion initiatives under the Bush administration, even absent any formal affiliation. In fact, his very decision to leave chess for civic activism in Russia was hailed in the West as a brave effort to keep the flame of Russian democracy alive. Makes you wonder what conversations Kasparov had from 2002 to 2005 to set that up. We will get to that. Gave up chess for politics. Kasparov was in effect advancing the same values that U.S.-funded democracy NGOs promoted. Indeed, American pro-democracy institutions took notice. Kasparov penned articles for the U.S.'s Journal of Democracy in 2007-2009. The Journal of Democracy. The CIA's in-house journal. Ned's in-house journal that we've been over countless times. And that Data Republican has been mining and did a whole data set on when she stopped by our stream. In fact, the National Endowment for Democracy has a funny little love affair. So again, this place, started by the CIA, formed after a commissioned study by USAID, is who Garry Kasparov begins writing for. 2007, Garry Kasparov in the National Endowment for Democracy, in-house journal, paid for by us taxpayers. This is 18 years ago, guys. Putin's regime is a kleptocracy. Stop pretending that a dialogue with Russia is taking place when there should be no common language with this Kremlin regime. You cannot treat Putin's police state according to the same rules as Germany or Canada. Not exactly a whiz kid in writing. Anyway, full stuff is here. I'm sure it's every bit as predictable as you can imagine. Chairman of the opposition group, co-leader of the pro-democracy coalition. Well, good thing we're the National Endowment for Democracy, and this is the Journal of Democracy. He's pro-us. Again, Ned grants are how things are structured so that it doesn't look like a CIA proprietary. The CIA gets a copy of every grant Ned has. We don't get to see Ned grants anymore, but the CIA gets a copy of every Ned grant. The New York Times reported this in 1986. Building a coalition and clashing with the Kremlin. By 2006, he had become the most visible leader of the other Russia coalition, working along figures like former Prime Minister Kasparov. In July 2006, they had their first major conference in Moscow, which Kasparov organized. He spearheaded a series of peaceful protest marches against managed democracy. The Dissenters' March. In March 2007, he led thousands of protesters through the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg in March 2007. These demonstrations, though mostly peaceful, were met with heavy-handed crackdowns. Mostly peaceful. Largely peaceful. What does that mean? Kasparov's led thousands of people through the streets, and they were largely peaceful? So you mean they weren't peaceful, they were peaceful asterisks. Let's try this. Moscow protests violence. I'm curious. We'll start with the Wikipedia here. Here they are. Here's our National Endowment for Democracy led peaceful protests. They were unsanctioned. So they defied a ban. How much you want to bet USAID sponsored this? And NED directly sponsored these organizing groups. On Russian television, they showed violent clashes with protesters. It's all about police violence, police violence. So this is same thing with BLM, right? Oh, of course, Radio Free Europe, the CIA proprietary, literal CIA proprietary, is first on the scene to say, to give coverage to it. The police were beating the protesters. Really? Did the protesters beat the police at all? Russian protesters defy police, NPR. Pushkin Square. Let's see if we can go to the YouTube. In 2007, YouTube would have only been 2 years old, so I doubt YouTube is gonna have all that much on it. But we'll have to, I guess, come back to that. In April 2007, Kasparov and fellow marchers were confronted by 9,000 riot police. Okay. So they took no shit. Why were there riot police if they weren't rioting? Why would you need riot police if it was peaceful? So then he tried to run for president. The Bush administration, in its final year, publicly criticized the harassment of opposition figures like Kasparov. So the U.S. president is directly saying, Kasparov's our guy. U.S. officials condemned the arrest of peaceful protesters in 2007. By championing free elections and organizing protests, he was advancing the same objectives as U.S. democracy promotion goals. Indeed, American NGOs and think tanks began partnering with him during this period. The National Press Club, Cato, free markets. In fact, he delivered the keynote at the Milton Friedman Prize dinner. We are back to Milton Friedman, the CIA's favorite philosopher. Well, everyone's talking about, oh, it's communism, it's communism, it's communism. You don't get it. It may manifest as tactical communism. But this is why I always say no blob, no pencils. This is why I always say, listen, I know a lot of people come over to my work from Milton Friedman adoration. I know. I've been there. I was there many, many moons ago. Until you understand that Milton Friedmanism is actually the driving force of this. While Milton Friedman is talking to you about free markets and free enterprise and getting the government out of private business, what he's not telling you is that all of those private businesses in the big leagues partner with governments to secure their markets, partner with governments to support their profits. You don't get worldwide Walmart without the Walton family working with the State Department and the State Department working with the CIA to secure the supply chain and export markets and retail conditions for Walmart. You don't get ExxonMobil as the biggest oil company in the world unless you have the government, the State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon taking military activity to secure your petroleum and to crack down on other governments to give you good deals for your petroleum. So once again, the ghost of Milton Friedman made manifest in U.S. government funded and backed rent-a-riot pawn of the U.S. State Department, Garry Kasparov. Although Bush had once tried to cultivate Putin, by 2007-8, the U.S. government's tone hardened. We're going to get to why. Emphasizing support for Russia's democratic development, personified by Kasparov's activism. Continued opposition and international outreach. After the 2008 electoral cycle, which ended with Putin's ally, Dmitry Medvedev, installed as president. Stalled, right? They can't bear to say elected. Kasparov pivoted to sustaining the opposition movement under more repressive conditions. He co-founded Solidarity, like the CIA's Solidarity movement in Poland, or NED's Solidarity Center, its union arm. A new umbrella uniting liberals like Boris Nemtsov and activists like Ilya Yashin. Kasparov worked to keep the flickering democratic opposition alive. He campaigned against constitutional changes. During these years, he strengthened his ties with international pro-democracy organizations, writing the op-ed, the Geneva Human Rights. Don't be fooled by Medvedev's liberal veneer. This message closely mirrored U.S. government-funded initiatives that emphasized civil society support and rule of law reform in Russia. The Obama administration's first term, 2009-2012, initially pursued a Russian reset with Medvedev. Yet even during the reset, the U.S. State Department continued funding NGOs through USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, IRI, NDI, to support human rights and civic engagement, civil society in Russia. Kasparov's work provided these efforts a visible, articulate champion. In 2010, he was among the first signatories of the online petition, Putin Must Go. Remember the CIA-backed Otpor movement? Let's get him out. Unified just around one thing. He must go. Which boldly called for Putin's resignation and urged Russian law enforcement to go after him. The digital dissent. So again, this is Hillary Clinton's State Department. This is during the Arab Spring. They're using the internet for it. To leverage the internet for activism in closed societies. This is why the State Department loved free speech online. This is where we are entering my world now. This is why you have Hillary Clinton doing free speech, before she called to end free speech altogether and end the First Amendment last year. Hillary Clinton was all over free speech online. It's the most important thing. 2010, same year. State Department, internet freedom, because it helps our dissident movements. Hillary Clinton, loving free speech. Internet freedom, foreign policy. Foreign Policy Magazine. Internet freedom. They loved free speech when it helped them topple governments. But when too much free speech started to topple their own, shut it down. Now the State Department needs a global engagement center to globally engage tech platforms to censor Trump supporters, Brexit supporters, AfD supporters, Vox Party supporters, Bolsonaro supporters. Hillary Clinton testified to Congress that they needed tens of millions more dollars in the international affairs budget to support internet free speech. Kasparov also began to forge personal connections with Western political leaders and think tanks. Frequently traveled to Europe and U.S. for conferences while he's still living in Russia. Notably, in 2011, he addressed the National Endowment for Democracy on the legacy of Ronald Reagan's Westminster speech. This is 2011. We're back to the ghost of Ronald Reagan. This is not during the Cold War. This is 20 words in 2011. Still doing the Reagan worship. Again, I don't mean to slay everyone's sacred cows, but we are back. We are back to the Ronald Reagan George Soros alliance. And we're going to get to the Soros side of this. And the secret CIA history. This is John Bolton was the head of USAID policy and budget for Ronald Reagan. Both the left and right wanted the $75 trillion in Russia. So he's the keynote speaker for the National Endowment for Democracy, created by the CIA, organized by USAID, to serve as a way to give money to groups the CIA wants funded, but doesn't want to claim as a CIA proprietary. I'm waiting for Cenk to interrupt and say, I thought I entered a debate about democracy, and somehow I ended up in a debate about the CIA. I thought this debate was supposed to be at a National Endowment for Democracy. Who doesn't want that? That's one of the best things we have. Well, what do you mean, the CIA? In 2011, that very year, working with the National Endowment for Democracy, Russia saw its largest anti-government demonstrations in 2 decades since the end of the Cold War. Wow. The same year, a year before USAID gets kicked out, the same year the main opposition leader, Garry Kasparov, is giving the fucking keynote at a Reagan conference from the National Endowment for Democracy, the biggest anti-government demonstrations in 20 years since the end of the Cold War, spontaneously break out all over Russia. That's crazy. Kasparov plunged into the protest movement. He organized the protest movement's coordination council and hosted a meeting of diverse opposition leaders from Alexei Navalny to plan a mass march in Moscow. The unity was the fruition of Kasparov's long-held dream to get every anti-Putin element marching together, regardless of ideology. We don't care if you're a Nazi and hate Putin because he's not Russian white identitarian enough. We don't care if you're a Marxist, a communist who thinks that Russia's too capitalist. The dregs of society all unite because it will install me as president so I can give the oil, the gas, the titanium, the rare earths, the steel to my backers in Washington. In February 2012, tens of thousands rallied in Moscow. Again, this is now 6 months before USAID gets kicked out of the country. It's weird. There have never been these kind of march of the millions in Russia since USAID left. That's crazy. What a crazy coincidence. An electrifying March of the Millions, an electrifying moment that Kasparov called the fulfillment of a dream, as he saw left-wing liberals and right-wing nationalists and socialists, nationalists and socialists, nationalists and socialists marching together. Strange bedfellows. Russia without Putin. The Obama administration voiced support for the protesters. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke out against what she called election fraud. Putin only won because of election fraud. Of course, 8 years later, you get arrested and kicked off of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, your fucking bank account if you allege there was election fraud here. But our Secretary of State had no problem alleging election fraud against Putin. Putin blamed her as sending a signal to the millions, USAID-backed millions inside of Moscow protesting. Kasparov and the protests were advancing the ideals the Obama administration had long championed. Accountable governance, punished government. Kasparov faced physical danger during this tumultuous period. In August 2012, outside a Moscow courthouse where the punk rock band Pussy Riot was being sentenced, Kasparov was beaten and arrested. Is this when he was biting police officers? So that happened while he was outside a State Department-backed Pussy Riot operation. We're back to fucking Pussy Riot. Also backed by the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA. Strange bedfellows. Right-wing neo-Nazis together with left-wing radical sexual feminist Marxist communist pussy riot. The punk rock. We're back to CIA and the music industry. A grotesque creation of the State Department. Pussy Riot received direct support from the U.S. State Department, funded by George Soros, funded by the NED, National Network for Democracy. And here you'll see Pussy Riot, State Department, Blinken. Here's the lead singer of Pussy Riot. Pussy Riot. At the State Department, the Harry S. Truman building, the State Department headquarters with Anthony Blinken. And here, so that's where Kasparov was arrested. And here she is, the lead singer of Pussy Riot, with the house all to herself, the U.S. Department of State. We've done this a million times, but again, just go to YouTube and type in Pussy Riot songs. Here's Pussy Riot. Trump. This was 1 week before the 2016 election. Pussy Riot, sponsored by the Central Intelligence Agency, through USAID, through NED, through state.
A Trump News Network special report.
We are glad to announce billionaire and everybody's favorite, Donald Trump, has won the presidential elections.
We are going to make America so great again.
Donald Trump made his first visit to Washington.
People have been maced, and the police look like they're blocked.
This is 1 week before the election. Trying to scare people. There'll be a police state, a crackdown against peaceful protesters if Trump wins. Remember, they literally, Antifa led those huge riots during inauguration weekend.
No more Muslims.
These are people that nobody knows who they are. We better be careful.
They're the violent ones. And any attempt at law enforcement is considered a police crackdown against peaceful protesters who are beating the shit out of you and lighting your home on fire.
No more Mexicans.
We're going to stop it, and we're going to build a wall.
You have to come in to be an American.
They're troublemakers. They're no good. We've got to take our country back up.
This is the kind of propaganda the CIA was sponsoring. To get rid of Putin, to steal the $75 trillion of resources we can loot from Russia, and to get rid of Trump because Trump's foreign policy was deemed to be too soft on Russia and making it impossible to seize those $75 trillion in resources. It's really that simple. But Kasparov was arrested biting police officers protesting support for Pussy Riot in 2012. Exile and global advocacy. In 2013, he leaves Russia, moves to New York. In 2011, he joined the board of the Human Rights Foundation. He became a roving ambassador, a shadow diplomat for Russian democracy, and an international NGO leader. He helped launch the Oslo Freedom Forum at Human Rights Watch. Became a sought-after speaker at U.S. think tanks and government hearings. Testified on the need for targeted Magnitsky sanctions against Russia. He called on Western democracies to increase the pressure on Putin's cronies. In 2014, when Crimea voted in a democratic referendum to join the Russian Federation, and war erupted in eastern Ukraine because eastern Ukraine said it would not obey the installed dictator, installed personally by Victoria Nuland, Yatsenyuk, there was no vote. So half the country said, fuck that. I didn't vote for this person. Nobody voted for this person. The U.S. State Department installed the new president after peaceful protests lit the fucking parliament building on fire. And the whole Euromaidan Square was up in smoke because millions on USAID payroll. USAID spent $5.4 billion paying those protesters. Took the government by force. He argued Crimea must be returned to Ukraine. Crimea voted. It's mostly Russian ethnics. They voted to join Russia. Wasn't taken, was voted. Kasparov's calls to isolate Putin foreshadowed the sanctions and diplomatic chill that the U.S. and EU imposed after Kasparov called for it. In 2016, Kasparov co-founded the Free Russia Forum in Vilnius, Lithuania, back to Lithuania and George Soros, the Open Society, an intellectual alternative to Putin's regime. The Free Russia Forum gathered exiled activists, former political prisoners, journalists, and reformist former officials, Yeltsin era, CIA puppet era, a dossier of human rights abusers to direct sanctions at, directly complemented U.S. and EU efforts to penalize Kremlin corruption. Banned from Russia in 2019. In these years, Kasparov deepened his affiliations with U.S. advocacy groups and think tanks. He joined the McCain Institute's Sedona Forum. The McCain Institute. We're back to the ghost of John McCain, who was personally there at the Maidan riots in 2014 that toppled the Ukraine government. He loves global freedom, but not freedom of speech if you're pro-Trump. 2017 starts the Renew Democracy Initiative, which is a real piece of work. We're going to get to that. Although we talked about it a little bit. Remember, that's like every enemy of the State Department. It's not just Russia. It's Iran, Venezuela, China, Cuba, the United States. Okay, so he posed Donald Trump's often conciliatory approach to Putin. It alarmed Kasparov. He emerged as a sharp critic of Trump's ambiguity towards Russian interference. Russiagate. He's a Russiagate guy. And championed the traditional State Department stance from the past 20 years, even when the Trump White House wavered, okay? Blob shit. Permanent Washington shit. When Trump appeared to side with Putin's denials of election meddling, i.e., when Trump said, yeah, my election win was legitimate, Russia didn't help me win, I won on my own, Kasparov lambasted it as a betrayal of the free world's values. So for the elected leader of the United States to publicly say that he won the election fair and square, Kasparov called that a betrayal of the free world's values to not acknowledge Russian interference in the U.S. election. That's how much of a fucking sausage sucker for the fucking limp dick of the CIA Garry Kasparov is. Fuck you to an old idol. In columns and tweets, he urged Congress and career diplomats to hold the line. Betray your boss at the State Department. From inside the government, disobey your boss, the commander-in-chief. Urge them. While Trump himself was lukewarm on pushing democracy abroad, the State Department and Congress maintained robust funding for Russian civil society through the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, NDI, IRI, and he collaborated with many of these organizations informally, speaking at NDI, IRI forums, continued as Human Rights Foundation chairman. You have Vladimir Kara-Murza, that's an Atlanta Council guy. So because Trump didn't control the budget, no matter what he wanted to do, he gave the money to the organizations through the international affairs budget that set their own fucking foreign policy, that overruled Trump's stated foreign policy. This is how Trump got worked in 1.0. And this is why it's so important to scale back USAID and State Department international affairs grants and cut every single one that's not aligned with the Trump foreign policy and de-fucking fund the National Endowment for Democracy. Proceed with the shutdown of USAID. Completely scale back. Manually review every single grant and cut every single one not consistent with Trump's foreign policy. Otherwise, the CIA will run foreign policy. The unelected CIA will run foreign policy no matter what the president says. That's how it works. Drawing on his status and connections, Garry Kasparov co-founded the World Liberty Congress. Oh, yeah. They love liberty except when it allows people to vote for people like Trump. An international alliance of pro-democracy activists from over 60 authoritarian countries. So now this dude who knew absolutely fuck all about anything except how pawn structures work on a chessboard is suddenly an expert on 60 different authoritarian countries. You know, there's only about 180, 190 countries. A third of the entire world needs to be regime changed by the State Department and USAID and the CIA and NAD. And Garry Kasparov's going to lead the charge to topple the governments of a third of the world's governments. Kasparov became vice president, working with dissidents from Iran and Venezuela. It was a culmination of Kasparov's constellation of NGO affiliations, supported by the Human Rights Foundation, Unite Dissidents. They love dissidents, except dissidents at home to the Biden regime, except dissidents in Europe and Germany and the UK and France and Italy and Spain. Like they give up. No, they'll crush them. They'll do police crackdowns on them. If you even went near the Capitol on January 6th, if you just trespassed on the lawn, which is normally open, most people didn't even know it was a violation, you get arrested. But there, it's a peaceful protest. He helped create a United Nations of Dissidents, a platform congenial to the U.S. State Department's democracy promotion aims. Oh, North Korea too. Democracy versus autocracy. It's just CIA language. Again, Democratic backsliding, all that. Oh, and this is great. So what he goes on to start, in March 2022, he and former oil tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky, this is MBK, okay, the big CIA MI6 Russian oligarch who kicked this all off in 2003. They co-founded the anti-war, so right 1 month after the war starts in February 2022. We're gonna get into this. We're gonna go over 4 hours. I give myself to you guys. All right. Let me pause this now, and then we are going to start up a new stream. I don't care if it takes me another hour and a half. We're gonna get through this material. Okay. Fuck it. I'm in DC. We rolling. I feel like I need a song to like transition us. We're going to do a mini denouement. I'm going to play a little bit of Lodi. Then we're going to reconvene in a second stream link.
Just about a year ago, I set out on the road, seeking my fame and fortune, looking for a pot of gold. Things got bad and things got worse. I guess you know the tune. Oh Lord, stuck in a low die again. Rode in on a Greyhound. I'll be walking out if I go. I was just passing through. Must be 7 months or more. Ran out of time and money. Looks like they took my friend. Oh Lord, I'm stuck in a low die again. If I only had a dollar for every song I sung, every time I've had to play while people sat there drunk, you know I'd catch the next train
is not time for me to say goodnight, Godspeed. I'll see you on the internet, because I'm going to be seeing you on the internet in about 4 or 5 minutes. Let me set up a new stream link. We're drilling down. Because I have no idea how deep this goes. See you in a minute.